Flipping through the pages of the dailies this morning, Daily Trust, The Guardian newspaper, Leadership newspaper, The Punch newspaper, Sporting Sun, Nigerian Tribune, and Vanguard newspaper this morning are all the dailies we'll be using today on this edition of Newspaper Review. Welcome to Immaculate Television. My name is Anoluwapo Idowu, and today what we'll do is just check through the dailies, how many stories we can use, how many stories are developing, breaking. All of that will bring to you in the meantime as we get right on this program. You're welcome. So yes, very quickly, we'll start with some stories making the rounds. Of course, I know you are also aware about the particular situation of the electricity subsidy making the rounds across the country. Today, people are talking different opinions, different positions. We've heard stories, we've heard commentaries and interview sessions earlier this morning on some other popular television stations across Nigeria talking about this particular topical issue, like we call it, very important. Of course, also with the heat stroke that is about to become a thing in Nigeria is another discussion today. And all of that will bring to you in the meantime in the course of this program and this edition. But first, let's take a few stories from the Punch newspaper. And the front page of the Punch newspaper would report something quite interesting, especially about the food crisis. And I personally reserve my own comment and opinion. I'm not going to lay it out because, of course, I really do not buy into this idea. But yes, let's get straight into what we have today. Talking about the Punch newspaper today, February 15, 2024, a day after Valentine's Day. We are all over the Valentine celebration now, the real deal. Tinubu governors meet over food crisis as emirs, NBA lament hardship. I think I said yesterday also on the show that the situation, the discourse, the readers on most of the newsprint has been hardship here again, hardship here, hardship there. So it's a back and forth situation, especially right now that we're having inflation, especially for rice. Yesterday it was reported by BBC that, of course, rice, the sale of rice, the inflation rate on rice alone is about 70%. Because if you study the market analysis, the projections of what it was about a couple of weeks back or a couple of months back to what it is now is another story, different story entirely. But yes, we'll also see how much of that would unfold, how much of that would develop. So about this particular story about food crisis, and now Tinubu and other governors have met over food crisis as emirs, NBA lament hardship in the country. And of course, the president governors meeting to profess solutions. Monarch, NBA laments economic crunch, insecurity. Federal government distributes free 42,000 tons of grains. Ogun governor rolls out over 5 billion intervention plan also on the Punch newspaper this morning. But to get more into that story, you have to check page 2 and page 21 of the Punch newspaper. But so let's get straight into some details, particularly about the distribution. Now, the readers read that federal government distributes 42,000 empty grains free. Ogun begins 5 billion naira interventions. And more on the story, according to the Punch newspaper this morning, would read that the federal government on Wednesday, that was yesterday, announced that it would distribute the 42,000 metric tons of grains approved by President Bola Tinubu to poor Nigerians at no cost, in quotes now. This came as Ogun State Governor Dapo Abiodun on Wednesday announced over 5 billion naira intervention plans, which he said would go a long way to help the residents of the state stay afloat the biting effect of the country's struggling economy, occasioned by the rising inflation, currency devaluation as well. Abiodun revealed that the intervention was a direct reaction to the fact that the government was never oblivious to or insensitive to the hard times Nigerians are going through. And then the governor said that intervention plans would cover education, health, distribution of food, as well as deliberate welfare packages for the workers. All of this is said. He said that whatever the country was expressing was necessary. Now, in quote, this is where the question comes in. Was a necessary sacrifice that had to be made towards ensuring a greater tomorrow. And sometimes it's the question of if we bail the cart now, eventually we might not be the ones benefiting of what the proceeds of that action would be. It's okay to fight. It's okay to strive. It's okay to, persevere and try to get along with the hard situations in the country. But it's not okay when people start dying, because that's the point. For how long can Nigerians stay? That's exactly the question now. That's the conversation that we need to have about this. If you say these current times and the present times that we are currently facing, we should continue to persevere. For how long? One. Two, what will be the projections? What are you doing as regards this? Of course, we've talked about cutting down on the cost of governance, but it seems to be falling on deaf ears of the government. We seem to have different stories developing every day. You check here, you see that the House members are projecting a particular amount of money to buy bulletproof vehicles and all of that. You see that in the story. You see the allocation of some states. Recently, it was brought out in the news that shortly after the president made the call for the removal of fuel subsidy, we saw that some states were actually upped in terms of their financial allocation by the federal government. Some of them were increased in terms of allocation to about 30%. So you can imagine how much of that is coming into states now. And unfortunately, there seems to be nothing happening in most states. So if you have 30% increment in the federal allocation coming to a state, I'm afraid if the citizens of that state are still suffering, what then are they using the money for? And it's a lot of money. If you think about this, you can almost imagine billions of naira. I saw the breakdown yesterday talking about the state, about a lot of them having about 30%, some of them 20% increment in the federal allocation. But this discussion self, we don't get to see it, we don't get to hear it. It's just within the government parastatals and government sector that we get to know that, oh yes, there's something like this, but they don't put it out to the public. We all keep clamoring, and they do as if they do not even care, as if they did not even know that they have increased the allocation from the federal government. It's all a shambolic case, and this is one thing we say every now and then. Of course, about this particular situation, meanwhile, the federal government also announced that Department of State Services and the National Emergency Management Agency, that's NEMA, had been engaged in the distribution process of the 42,000 MT of grains approved by Tinubu in order to ensure that the commodities get to the targeted citizens nationwide. Another question, for every of these times when you bring up news, when you bring up angles to stories, there's always this question for this present administration and even the past administration. Now, the question for this now, if you say you are trying to get the commodities to targeted citizens, one, who are the targeted citizens? We heard about something one time about the poorest of the poor, but we don't seem to have a database to actually prove that. There's nobody that can tell me that someone is the poorest of the poor and the other person is not. How can you differentiate them? On what basis? What are the database we have in the country? Questionable. Because I know for a fact that we cannot move until we start looking in depth into some foundational structures that we need to put in place. For instance, we do not have proper database in Nigeria. Most of the databases we use in Nigeria are just mere projections, mere assimilations, just a graphical representation. Not exactly the case, because if you ask me, if we say we go by the world standard, the World Health Organization standard, that about maybe $15 or whatever dollar is the rate, like if you spend below this particular unit of dollar, then you are considered to be poor. But how can you tell? That's the question. Because for an average person some people stay in the village. For instance, now let me bring a perspective to this. If you stay in the village, you don't need to spend much, especially if you have a subsistence farming situation around your house. You grow your tomato, you grow your vegetables. You don't need to buy anything. So if you don't get to spend a day, does that mean you're poor? Not exactly. So the spending and all these projections of, well, if you spend this particular unit of the dollar, then you are considered poor. If you spend this, then you are considered not poor. I'm not sure it will work for this country. I'm not sure it's working at the moment, because when we have projections, if I ask anybody now, how many people are in Nigeria, you would say about 200 million, because that was the last data weeks. But I can assure you that Nigeria is more than 200 million. I know some people are also saying the same thing. For projections now, maybe from the World Health Organization or United Nations, I can't particularly picture. There's a particular projection that by 2050, Nigeria is going to have a population growth of about 440 million people. It's still a projection, but it's quite close. Sometimes, we are okay when the data is quite close to reality, but in actual sense, many of the times it's not always close. And that's one of the problems we keep having. We need database in this country. We need to know how many Nigerians are in this country. For one, how many percentage is the youth, how many are women, how many are children, how many are the elderly, so we can then make things right. Until we get to this point, I'm afraid it's still going to be a basket case. But away from that now, still talking about this development about the food crisis in the country, where a bag of rice is at 77,000 naira of yesterday or the day before, 77,000 naira per bag. An average person earns 30,000 naira minimum wage, has a family of 2-3. Is this still the same thing? What do they do? That's the question. What can they do? How can they feed the family? That's another conversation, but yes, not for now. So talking about this now, the Minister of Agriculture and Food Security, Abubakar Kyari, who disclosed this at a ministerial press briefing in Abuja, further revealed that the government will be supporting 500,000 farmers to cultivate and produce 1 million metric tons of rice. I hope this is true, because when you see these figures, it's almost funny, because if you consider the preceding and then the subsequent writings in this particular report, you will see that it's almost impossible. Now, he said this would increase Nigeria's rice production from the current 7 or 8, again, assimilation, again, guessworks, again, hypothesis, not so sure, saying about 8, 7 or 8. Why can't we be sure at 8? Why can't we be sure at 7? If you are going to be going for 7, then let's go for 7. But it still falls down to the same thing. It speaks to the fact that we do not have database in this country, and that's a major foundational structural problem in this country. So he went on to say that they'll support 500,000 farmers, and then he said they want to up the game from the current 7 or 8 million tons annually to a new level. And the new level now, this, according to the government, is that they're adding to take offtake of the 60,000 metric tons of rice being produced by millers. And then they revealed that 15 state governors had expressed interest to participate fully in this year's dry season farming, adding that this will help ameliorating the food crisis being experienced in Nigeria. And all of this and this. I don't even want to go into this story any longer, but if you want to catch more on that story, check the Punch newspaper this morning. There's more of that story on the Punch newspaper. Moving shortly away from that story now, we see a situation in Benue. Benue residents lament increase in cement price. Also very notable, very distinct information. Of course, we've seen that that is so topical for them, for the people in Benue now. A lot of persons that want to build houses. Of course, we know the population is increasing, it's explosive, and people would need to build houses. So if they need to build houses and then they get, I remember maybe about 30% increment had gone over cement price in recent times. I'm not so sure particularly, but yes, around that figure. And again, moving away from that story now, Dangote refinery to export too few cargoes, according to reports. Seems like a good development on that side. But away from that too, Carlos lawyer sues Anambra's community leader, demands 50 billion naira damages, and all of that. Varsity lecturer proposes on to students in classroom on Valentine's Day. A good one for him and the students. If she gets to say yes, good for you. If no, whichever the case is. Away from that now, very quickly, we move on to the Vanguard newspaper this morning. And right on the front page of the Vanguard newspaper, the caption is reading so loud and clear, crystal clear, I would say, that we can no longer pacify our subjects. Northern monarchs tell federal government. That's exactly from the Northern monarchs, and of course a brief into that story would be coming from Kaduna, that monarchs from the north under the umbrella of Northern Traditional Council, NTC, led by the state Sultan of Sokoto Alhaji Muhammad Shahad Abubakar III, yesterday told the federal government that the hardship, insecurity, poverty and unemployment in Nigeria and the north in particular was getting to a level they could no longer pacify the people from revolting. So addressing members yesterday at the Arewa House in Kaduna, during the 6th Executive National Northern Traditional Council committee meeting, the Sultan informed the government that traditional rulers, religious leaders, as well as state governors had been pacifying the masses and the jobless youth from revolting against political leaders at the helm of affairs. No. Sometimes I wonder, if we present this to the government, what do we expect them to do? I wouldn't know. Maybe you know better. Of course, exactly. We all know this current situation in the country is not palatable. People are planning protests, and justifiably so, because the hard times that we are in now, it's not even normal. It's not proper. Dovetailing the current heat crisis, the heat wave that's come into the country. We keep telling people climate change exists. They say no. And maybe now people will begin to say yes. But yes, we'll still see how much of that would come in recent times. Taking further view into some of these stories, funeral arrangement for Akeredolu commences today. Also, 1 dead, 21 injured in United States Super Bowl parade shooting. That's on the foreign scene. And insurgency, Borno government cleared, released 500 suspects, says commissioner. And also about the loan scheme, no students will be left behind. Gbajabiamila tells NANS, National Association of Nigerian Students, went for a visit yesterday. Of course, according to report, it was not a scheduled meeting. It was just an impromptu, or what we call an extemporaneous meeting. They did not plan for it, but yes, the Secretary of the Federal Government of the Federation said they could be given a chance. They gave them audience, and they talked about many things, especially about the student loan and all that. So it was quite a conclusive meeting that we're expecting would yield results from that as well. Now, Nigerian Tribune newspaper is talking about rising debts. Federal government may cancel electricity subsidy, and that's coming from the minister Adelabu himself, particularly this morning, talking about the current situation. There has been fears everywhere, hearsays here, hearsays there, every now and then, back and forth situation yet again in the country, especially about the electricity subsidy. It was talking about the 1.6 trillion naira that the government, that is required for the government to, supply for electricity subsidy in 2024, But yes, more on the story would mean that with over 1.62 trillion naira required for electricity subsidy in 2024, the federal government said it may soon halt payment of tariff differentials for customers. Already, it said with the rising debts to the power generating companies, that's GenCos, fixed at 1.3 trillion subsidy payments were not sustainable. So the Minister of Power, Adebayo Adelabu, who made the disclosure at a briefing on Wednesday, said the nation must begin to move towards a cost-effective tariff model. And all of that, he went ahead to say that beyond the 1.3 trillion indebted to the GenCos, federal government was still owing gas companies about 1.3 billion. Why is everything 1.3 now? Anyway. As a result, he believed that the state government would be granted access to generate power independently to supply power in their respective states. According to the minister, only 450 billion naira was budgeted for subsidy this year, but the ministry needs over 2 trillion naira for subsidy. So he said state government will now be allowed to generate power independently to supply power to their state, which of course some states are already doing. And he talked about the grid collapse that collapsed. He said on the grid that has collapsed for about 6 times between December 2023 and now, that's barely 60-something days. Anyway, and now he said this was caused by shortage of gas, aging machines in the grid. I think that's exactly one of the things we should tackle. We've been talking about the poor maintenance structure we have in this country, poor maintenance habits. We are so lackadaisical about some of the things we have. We do not get to check them for maintenance. We do not check them every now and then. We do not follow the rules. We just do things, and then, especially because of the change in power. So if there's a policy or there's a structure that was built by a particular administration, and the next administration comes and they do not subscribe to what we have done, they would abandon the project and leave it and let it lie fallow. So in response to this, it's almost in the same line. And then he said the machines are aging. So that's why there's been failure in some of the distribution centers. He talked about the grid. He said aging machines in the grid value chain, low capacity to evacuate generated power, the destruction of power stations in some parts of the northeast geopolitical zone of the country as well. He went on to say something that he said the transmission company of Nigeria has over 100 abandoned projects due to variations in contract figures as a result of the fluctuations of the forex. Hence, the company will not award new contracts till all such projects are completed. He went on to say also that the minister also said over 50 billion naira has been earmarked in the 2024 budget to build more mini grids to supply power to remote areas. And then to this end, he urged electricity distribution companies, that's DISCOs, in perspective to set up, adding that the government would not hesitate to withdraw licenses of any airing DISCOs, and that's coming from Adelabu himself. But yes, many questions emanating from this particular report as well. If you ask me, I would ask you again, because like the saying goes, if you ask me now, who I go ask, but I think I'm going to ask the same person that is right in power and the right person to talk to us about this. So he said about 100 abandoned projects are currently in the country, and that's what we say. When there's a change in power, there seems to be an abandonment of policies, of projects, of past administration's efforts, and we don't know that we are doing ourselves. That's the same resolve I have, because of course, obviously we are doing ourselves. If we cannot continue projects that need to be continued, then whose money is wasting? Nigeria. So if Nigeria is at loss, your party is at loss too. So whichever way, I think we got ourselves into this problem that we are currently facing. And I'm afraid if we don't do things right, we might not even get out of this in a jiffy. But yes, away from that now, breaking news now. Senate names 43-member panel on constitutional review, and that's exactly a topical issue on Nigerian Tribune newspaper. And again now, so many stories, especially about the gas explosion that rocked Lagos community, a very sad one as well. But yes, we hope that calm has been restored, and we pray that the people that are affected, their families that are grieving, God will provide them succor and give them the fortitude to bear the loss. Away from that now, let's talk Blueprint newspaper this morning. Blueprints, what do you have to say to Nigerians? Blueprint is reporting also on food crisis that needy Nigerians to get 42,000 metric tons of grains. Urges media collaboration to amplify government policies. 42,000 metric tons of grains to Nigerians. We hope it will really go a long way. We expect that it will go a long way in this country. Yes, away from that, totally away from the Blueprint newspaper. Now, Daily Trust is reporting something I would like to report to you straight up this morning on the Immaculate Television newspaper review, and that's coming from the Sultan. And I think I've said this, but yes, more emphasis on this would mean that Nigeria sitting on keg of gunpowder. Yeah, it's ironical because, of course, if you consider that denotatively and connotatively, you understand what the person, the Sultan, is trying to say. Of course, we are just at a point that any small thing can break many strengths or our strength in the country, and we are hoping this will not get to that point, because it seems as though we are just shooting in the air. It seems like as if we are shooting at night. We are not shooting when we can see. We are just shooting at different things, different basketballs, like we call it. Not so sure of what exactly we are doing. We are running on one limb, and for how long can we do that? That's the question now. For how long can we sustain this? For how long can we persevere? For how long can we strive to still live on and get along with this current situation? All right. Anyway, Daily Trust is reporting that Nigeria is sitting on keg of gunpowder. That's coming from the Sultan. And then they said we distribute 42,000 MT of grains for free. That's if you have collected money before. Anyway, federal government tells citizens no crashing food prices is better. Expert is saying CAN, that's CAN, NBA demand concrete action. Zulum Abiodun Sanwo-Olu unveil measures also on the front page of Daily Trust newspaper. 60 reps proposed bill to return Nigeria to parliamentary system. Upstream Commission transfers over 200 staff to Lagos as well. Amid economic hardships, Trust Radio brings joy to lovers. That's a commercial right there. Military bust gun factory in Plateau State. Also a story to check. You want to get more on that story, check the pages of Daily Trust newspaper this morning. Now to the Guardian newspaper, reporting quite interestingly about the forest crisis that we are currently facing. Forest crisis pushes petrol subsidy to 907.5 billion naira monthly. I would not like to go over this message, this particular report, but you want to catch more on this, check the Guardian newspaper, page 6 particularly is where to find this interesting story this morning. Of course, there's a graphical representation, if you are seeing that on your screen, showing the fuel pump and then a vehicle, breaking down in percentage the inflation rate and some other rate as well. If you're seeing that, it's quite a beautiful graphical representation from the Guardian newspaper. Thumbs up to Guardian. Thank you for that. Away from that now, troops bust illegal weapons factory in Plateau State. Senate begins constitution review as Reps Kavas return to parliamentary system in 2031. And out of school children epidemic and 68 billion naira UBEC fund. Electricity tariff to double as federal government considers hike over debt burden. Where should we get the money from? If all of this subsidy that we've not seen the essence. It seems as though we have not seen the essence of the subsidy remover and the fuel subsidy remover. Now you still want to remove subsidy on the electricity that we are not even having. People have been complaining that they are paying for darkness. You're not paying for power, you're paying for darkness. For every time you pay, there's no assurance that you're going to have light, especially now that we are in a very pressing time that the heat wave is ravaging the country. We need power supply, at least stable power supply, especially in the night. If you have to sleep inside a very hot room, there are many things that can happen to you. And it speaks to the fact also that we do not really value and prioritize human lives in this country. Because if we do, some things will not be hard to do. We'll make some policies that will help better the lives of people. For instance, now, when people are dehydrated because of this current situation, in the northern part of this country, about 41 degrees Celsius is recorded and reported according to NIMET, Nigerian Meteorological Agency, and also 39% coming down south. And of course, how can we survive this if we do not have a stable power supply? People need to put on AC, people need to put on fans so that they will not die of exhaustion or heat stroke or heat exhaustion or what have you that might come from that particular heat situation. It is not a joke. We need to do something about it now. The Leadership newspaper is reporting that northern leaders are worried over the state of the nation. And I think we've said that they say that insecurity, poverty, plaguing our people exactly. That's particular message from the Leadership newspaper this morning. But you want to get more on that story, check page 4 of the Leadership newspaper this morning. Student loan scheme takes off in 3 weeks. That's coming from Bajabia Mila. Of course, away from that now to the CBN case. CBN raises customs duty rate by 2.6%, fifth time in 2024. Not so good. Away from that now to the Sporting Sun before we round up today. So many sporting stories from the sporting community making the rounds now. Fans told to boo Messi during Paris Olympics. That's coming from the Sporting Sun this morning. Grealish, Bernardo Silva suffer injury. I think I like that. I like the sound of it from a national position. Anyway, I know Ekong, Lukman make AFCON best 6. We have our Nigerians making us proud right there. The Super Eagles of Nigeria. Also, Neymar's ex-girlfriend branded too hot to handle. Also, a story you would check. My husband's teammate broke my nose at Forest game. That's coming from Ashley, I think a fan of Nottingham Forest or so. Guardiola wary of Chelsea. Also making the news today. Allegri told to sign Madueke. Also a story you should check. Bring on Usyk. Fury is saying that. Bellingham faces Real Madrid ban. Tottenham holds contract talks with Son. All of these stories, you want to catch more on them, check Sporting Sun newspaper for today, February 15, 2024. And it's been a wonderful time on this edition of Newspaper Review on Immaculate Television. Once and again, my name is Anolu Akpoido. But before we go, remember that you can stream us on multiple digital platforms. For iPhone users, Limex World TV app is where to find us, as well for Android users, NetNiger TV app is where we are. And on that note, to say thank you for joining. Do enjoy the rest of your day. But know that we have subsequent programs and newscasts coming your way, but just in a moment. Stay with us. Don't go nowhere.